Welcome to Long Takes, a new podcast from ScreenCrush.com. I'm Erin Whitney, senior editor at ScreenCrush.
And I'm Britt Hayes, associate editor at ScreenCrush.
And today we're joined by Shirley Li from Entertainment Weekly.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
This is our second episode of Long Takes, and today we're going to be talking about Asian visibility and representation in Hollywood and how in film and TV this year we've seen a lot of controversy around whitewashing and also a lot of progress and hope for the future. And Shirley, you just recently wrote a series about all of this for Entertainment Weekly.
Yes, I did. It was something that was in the works for a long while. A while back when Netflix announced that Danny Rand for Iron Fist was going to be played by a white man, by Finn Jones. There's a lot of chatter about whether that was considered whitewashing or not because it was an originally white character but based on really Asian stereotypes. So it was kind of a story that was percolating, just looking at the state of Asian representation. And then when Crazy Rich Asians got greenlit, that felt like the right time to do it.
Right, yeah. So there's things to be worried about, but also some positivity in the future, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you want me to just go through kind of the examples that have happened in the past year and a half or 2 years, I mean,
sure.
we could start off with Cameron Crowe's little scene, Aloha.
Right.
I mean, Emma Stone played a character, Victoria Nguyen, who was, I believe, half Vietnamese, was that it? And quarter Chinese.
A quarter something,
right,
yeah, quarter Chinese and a quarter, I think, Hawaiian.
Right, a quarter something here and there. I mean, the thing is, when you look at Emma Stone, that is clearly a white woman playing a character that could have gone to an Asian or a half Asian actor.
Right.
And then you also have Scarlett Johansson cast in Ghost in the Shell, Tilda Swinton cast as an originally Asian character in Doctor Strange, and like we mentioned, Netflix's Iron Fist, and some upcoming projects too. And the problem here is they're all so murky. You know, the way to think about it, it's people can make the argument that, oh, the character in Ghost in the Shell is a cyborg and therefore not someone you should be, up in arms about. But that's not the point. It's it's a quintessential Japanese story, and that's where the frustration comes from. And a couple of these other examples too. Scott Derrickson said that, Tilda Swinton's character, the Ancient One, was rewritten as a Celtic woman instead of Asian, an Asian man. So that kind of fixes it, quote unquote, but it doesn't fix it because it was a character who was originally Asian. So those are a couple of the controversies that have come up in the past year.
I just wanted to ask, because I read, Jen Yamato's piece on the Daily Beast about Scott Derrickson and Doctor Strange and that particular casting. I guess I just wanted to kind of talk about that for a second because I'm not defending it. I also just think that he did a really good job of explaining why it was difficult to cast that role. And I kind of wondered if maybe they just shouldn't have had that character at all. Like maybe they should have found a different workaround for that. Like, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, for sure. I mean, on my end, it's really hard to come up with a resolution. I think for everyone I talk to a bunch of casting directors, a bunch of actors, and there's no consensus on what should have been done. It's just something that was done and irked people. And that's really where the conundrum comes in. It's like, what do you do? Do you just get rid of the character as a whole and then remove a part of Doctor Strange's origins? Or do you rewrite him into a Celtic woman to make everything fit? I don't think there is a clear answer. I think what people were angry about was this was a missed opportunity. Even if you're trying to avoid a stereotype, that still takes away an opportunity for an Asian actor to get a major starring role in a huge film. That said, I mean, I think Tilda Swinton was great in the film. She absolutely captured that character that they wrote for her. But again, there's no real clear answer. I think what people are always angry about is how many opportunities there are, and when you miss one, it's rough.
The thing I found the most interesting about that Scott Derrickson interview in the Daily Beast is he does kind of admit that they actually were looking for an Asian actress at first, whether or not, they actually were. He says they were. But he says that his reason for not casting an Asian actress was he was worried about playing into this dragon lady stereotype, which I found kind of interesting that he hadn't really mentioned that in previous interviews. And I think it's hopeful in one sense that he was aware of that and trying to avoid it, but I wonder that is copping out and avoiding that, enough of an excuse to say, we're trying to avoid one stereotype, it led us to possibly leading into another, so let's just completely ignore it and erase all Asian visibility with this character and just cast a white woman. So I wonder, is that a laziness on the part of, does that show a larger laziness on the part of filmmakers that they're so afraid of exploring new areas that instead they're just sort of avoiding it entirely? And, I don't know what the answer is. Like, what is the way to avoid that dragon lady stereotype? Is it finding, maybe Asian writers to actually write the character? Maybe it goes beyond just adapting it to the screen for the sake of a Marvel audience and actually thinking about how to change the characters when there is no precedence for it.
I think a good solution for that too, but I just thought it was as a possible solution, like you said, bringing in Asian writers. I mean, for Neighbors 2, Seth Rogen had Lena Dunham and other female writers come in and help them sort of write this female-driven narrative because they're dudes. Right. And this is a story about women.
Yeah, that's a good way to combat it. I think Erin, you're right. Yeah, bringing in Asian writers would absolutely have helped just with that point of view. I mean, something interesting that came up in my discussion with Masaoka, he's the actor from Heroes, recently left Hawaii Five-0. He's one of the more prominent actors, and he said to me, he was saying that stereotypes aren't a bad thing. If we see only stereotypes, then that's a bad thing. So you have to consider it from both sides. If there are stereotypes, then at least there's visibility. And I know that sounds kind of wrong and weird, but visibility is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing as long as you have other characters that are not stereotypical. And that was kind of the point of view that he had. And it made sense to me because in a case like this, in the case with Doctor Strange, once you erase an Asian actor completely as a whole just to avoid a stereotype, then that's a lose. That's a lose-lose.
Right. And at least in that case, there would be a foundation to start upon. I mean, not that stereotypes should be approached that way, but if there is one, then there's more to learn from that case, and at least there is an actual Asian actor that we can start to talk about and what to improve on and what to change.
There was a Hollywood Reporter piece, I think, on Benedict Wong's role in Doctor Strange. His role as kind of the sidekick, I guess. I'm trying to think of the right word for him. It's expanded past stereotypes, and he gets his own kind of supporting role there, but then he becomes roughly the only Asian face you see and remember from the film.
Right.
And so that's what you get when you erase another character.
It's a real shame, too, with that film in particular, because I found that everyone in the movie who was not a white man was way more interesting.
Agreed.
You have this story about like an obnoxious, entitled, privileged white man, and he's just constantly being like, I mean, at least for the first like 30 minutes, is being knocked down a peg and put in his place by women and people of color. And I think that's amazing. And then they just kind of like do away with it and go into like the conventional narrative. And then he becomes like incredibly powerful because he read a few books really fast. Like, and then he's like better than everyone else, which is really annoying. But for a shining moment, it was like, oh, wow, the other people in this movie who are not white dudes are so much cooler. And I almost would rather see any one of them play Doctor Strange than this guy.
Totally.
There you go.
It had potential, which is, I think, what made especially the casting even more disappointing than it would have been otherwise.
I think Doctor Strange and Iron Fist both fall within this trap. Iron Fist, Danny Rand himself is, a student of Asian stereotyping, if you will, right? It's So then is it good to have that character in the first place anchor a television show? Is it good to have Doctor Strange in the first place be a story that's told? That all goes back to just there being not enough stories about Asian superheroes or stories centered around a purely Asian character. And so that's where the wiggle room comes in. That's where some of the blurred lines come in. That's why casting directors and directors can argue that, oh, this was a creative decision and we're avoiding a stereotype. And also the character was originally white, built on stereotypes. There's just a lot of different arguments there. And I think at the end of the day, there just aren't enough stories. And so a call that's, I mean, something that's out there from Asian directors and Asian actors is there needs to be more writers. So this is kind of a circuitous way to go back to, Erin, your point. If there were more Asian writers who were writing stories about Asian characters, then that's a way around this conundrum that superhero shows and films really face. Not to rag on Marvel, but I know those were Marvel examples, but I think that's one solution.
Yeah. And I was actually recently reading a quote by Marjorie Liu, who's a Marvel Comics writer, and it was about the Iron Fist casting, and she was saying that it was such a missed opportunity because it was a chance for Netflix and Marvel to actually subvert those tropes and to not fall back on that excuse. And it just makes me wonder, I think that beyond just pushing for more Asian writers and casting more Asian actors is that we need to push executives and the creators to actually work harder to subvert what was wrong in the first place. If something was actually incorrect in the first place, then let's take it upon them to fix it. Just as I think Scott Derrickson had that idea, like the seed of that idea to sort of fix the Ancient One stereotyping, but it takes more than just casting an actor or fixing it with an easy step. There needs to be actual people that want to fix it from the ground up.
Right. And it's not even just fixing. I mean, you could praise Marvel for casting Elodie Yung as Elektra. That's kind of subverting the role itself when there wasn't anything to fix. It's just casting someone who you would not have pictured as Elektra, but absolutely fits. It's bringing those faces out there.
I think another good way to start doing that too, because I think we talk a lot about how we need to give these people more opportunities, whether it's women or other minorities. And I think that there's a really good way to do that. And it starts from the ground up. And you take someone like Paul Feig, who unfortunately has become this sort of symbol for gatekeeper for women.
Right.
Sucks, but it's also great. But I mean, something that he does that's very simple. And we saw it late last year, earlier this year, was he took a set photo from Ghostbusters, and it was most of the people working on that movie were women, from grips to production assistants to, I mean, everybody involved on every level was female. And I think that that's something that you have to do, is that you have to open the door and you have to say, okay, I'm going to make a concerted effort to look for talented women and minorities and give them these jobs and open that door for them so that they can start climbing the ladder and have the same opportunities. They just need the same opportunities. Mm-hmm. That's it. Once you give them those opportunities, once they're in the door, I think it becomes a little easier. But that's the problem, is that nobody's opening the door.
Right. There are only a couple of creators out there who are opening that door, and it's really good on them to do so. I mean, you can look at Master of None for being quite inclusive. They're actually, the TV space has been more inclusive, and maybe that's because it's the era of peak TV. There are more projects, there are more voices that can be heard. The real issue is in the film space. It's just still so hard for executives to think of an Asian movie star, even though hypocritically, I guess they want to appeal to, the Asian box office. And yet they can't think of a movie star who can star in Ghost in the Shell, for example. And so that's the problem. It's the ultimate goal is having an Asian movie star, front one of these huge tentpole films. And I think Ming-Na Wen was saying this to me, where she was saying that, she thought change was kind of happening when she started her career. It was starting from the ground up. It was people were doing colorblind casting. They were very aware. And so they were hiring more diverse people behind the scenes. And yet that didn't exactly trickle up, if that makes sense. And so it's a cycle that starts all over again. But I think the difference now is that we have social media, is that we have these fans who can really rally against poor decisions and make themselves heard. And so maybe that's what's going to help sustain this wave. I'm still kind of hesitant to call it a total, tidal wave or anything like that, but there's something happening, and it's just a matter of sustaining it, because it's been something that's happened. People have hired diverse crews, writers, but it just didn't trickle up, and that takes time.
That was one of the most interesting things to me about the first piece that you published about that we're at a crossroads, and how much. I think there was this statistic from USC that I think 3.9% of the actors in films from 2015 were Asian, which is an incredibly ridiculously small percentage.
In the top 100 grossing films.
Right.
Yeah, but still.
Still not good. And the fact that I think that statistic hasn't changed since 2007. And just thinking about how nothing has changed and what this moment was and why it's changing now. And like you say, it's social media. And I really think that it's so interesting that now that we have these hashtags, I think there was a Mulan hashtag.
Yeah, there was Make Mulan Right. There was also the Whitewashed Out hashtag. There's the, Starring John Cho hashtag. There's all these hashtags, which is really great, but they lead to petitions, and they do lead to casting directors and execs hearing them. I mean, to what extent, I'm not totally sure. There's no way to totally measure, how many projects they've greenlit now compared to before, but those are there, and they feel the pressure, which is something that every casting director I talked to said, that they feel pressured now. They felt pressure before, but now it's a different kind of pressure. It's fans will tweet at them. Fans will tweet at those films. They will create hashtags, create petitions, and that's great. There's a voice. There's a voice calling for something, and that assures execs that hey, there are people out there who want to watch this film, or they want to watch this story.
Right.
Unfortunately, I feel like we were all so. I mean, I know I was too, because I've had to write a lot of these Mulan stories in like our just weekly articles and stuff. And like, I think we were all so focused on Disney's Mulan movie that nobody bothered to think about Sony's Mulan movie. And they turned around and hired a white dude to direct it.
Right. Yeah. Alex Graves.
Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, he's directed some good TV, I guess, but like, you couldn't have found anyone else, like even just like a woman, just give me a woman maybe, because it's a story about a woman, or just somebody who is not a white guy who knows nothing about this story at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a diehard Game of Thrones fan, and I have faith that Alex Graves can direct a great battle sequence. But when I saw that news too, Britt, I'm with you. I was like, oh, okay, well,
I was criticizing it, and I was getting criticism back at me on Twitter from other journalists who I will be polite and not name, who were like, how do you know that they didn't meet with Asian directors? And like, your article doesn't list any Asian directors that could, that could direct this. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was my job to furnish them, like to do their job for them. Like, I can go back and add like a whole list. I can go like, here's a link to a Wikipedia page, which is like, that's like the least amount of work you can do. But like, they don't do that. And it's just like, how do you know that they didn't meet with Asian directors? I'm like, well, because it was never reported. I mean, like, I don't know that for a fact, but like from between the time that this movie went into development a few months ago to now, we heard nothing. And then all of a sudden it was like, we're hiring a white dude. So if you did speak to Asian directors, maybe that's something that you should have, decided to put in the press.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's actually something that I've seen, like just looking at the online chatter, whether it's on Twitter or on Tumblr. This is something that's also come up with casting. For example, with Ghost in the Shell, with Scarlett Johansson, I feel like a lot of people kept tweeting like, why didn't they consider Rinko Kikuchi? Or why didn't they look at so-and-so and so-and-so? I think that's going, or like, oh, you don't know if they looked at Rinko Kikuchi and decided that her English isn't up to par, or they, maybe they did look at these people. And that's just making excuses. The ultimate decision was made, and it's a backward step. And so I feel like those arguments just, I mean, I'm with you, Braze. It doesn't make sense to even argue that, oh, well, you don't know if they've looked at Asian directors, if they looked at Asian actors. The point is they didn't go with an Asian actor or an Asian director in the end, and that's the problem.
Exactly, yeah.
And you get a lot of lists too. Like you'll get short lists that get leaked. Mm-hmm. And on those short lists, a lot of times you never see any interesting. It's always just like, here's a white dude, here's a white dude, here's a white dude, here's a white person, here's like whatever. And you just see the same thing over and over. So it's like, I'm sorry if I just assume based on, that this they're doing.
And also, sort of pivoting away from this point, it's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's not just missed opportunities in terms of the color of your skin, like, oh, this is an Asian character and now it's a white actor. It's also something that people are also angry about is the fact that a lot of the time, these are Asian stories that are being rewritten. I mean, I'm going back to Ghost in the Shell, but I haven't, obviously none of us have seen this new Ghost in the Shell. There's only been a little bit of footage from the trailers and the teasers that look really visually exciting. But as a fan of the 1995 original, you start wondering, like, what exactly are they changing in the story to make it Hollywoodized, to make it appeal to more people, quote unquote. And that's something that that's something that I think people are sad about, that, you not only miss an opportunity to cast an Asian actor, you tweak the story so that it's no longer an Asian story. I'm not sure if this is making sense, but this is, yeah. Ghost in the Shell is like I said before, a quintessential Japanese story. It's about feeling that isolation in a really connected world. And so to take that away and yet still use visual elements from it, robotic geishas and stuff like that, but then put a white actor at the center of it, and as far as the trailer goes, it seems like it's about her finding her identity. You're mixing that up a bit. You're fudging around with it. And so that's something that personally I'm uncomfortable with, and fans are uncomfortable with. And so it's multiple layers of disappointment, which is so sad to say. And I guess I should say here that I'm Asian American.
Yeah, if nobody got that by now. I think that, Ghost in the Shell, I think that it does have universal appeal to a certain degree of, like, you were saying, like, feeling isolated in a world that's, like, so connected through all this technology. I mean, that's something that like, Black Mirror explores. I mean, like, these are things that, like, I think everyone can relate to. But you're right, it does take all these opportunities and miss them. And it wants to co-opt Asian culture with all these visuals and stuff, and then, like, recast the role with a white actress. And on the way, like, I'm torn because, like, I love Scarlett Johansson so much. I'm, like, obsessed with her. But
right.
On the other hand, I do see why it's a huge problem. And I can't help but wonder, too, knowing what I know with some friends of mine in the industry and having spoken with them about the way that Marvel films play in China, for instance, there are things that Marvel does when they release a movie in China. Like, they add in extra scenes for Chinese audiences.
Yes.
And the Chinese audiences usually don't like them because they're very, like, what we think of as, like, stereotypically Asian things.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chinese audiences hate them because they're just like, oh, this is how Americans think that, like, we are. And they just, like, they're like, they don't get it. They just like the movie as it is on its own. So I think that maybe, kind of speaking to your point too, Shirley, is that, like, they think that, like, if they just don't address it or don't even try, that's better than trying. So, like, casting Scarlett Johansson is like, okay, here's, like, this, like, beloved superstar who's white, and we'll put her in this, and then we'll keep a bunch of the Asian stuff in there, but this way it appeals to, like, everyone.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. It's like throwing a bone. It's like, oh, we recognize the issue, so here's what we've done to alleviate it, but it's not really doing anything. Right. The main problem is still there.
And it doesn't help either that they tried that they briefly flirted with the idea of basically putting her in yellow face with CGI.
Oh, God.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's like,
and I don't know what they were thinking with that. I mean, like, I spoke to people, and that was, like, a story that I got, and I spoke to people who knew firsthand what was going on, and they were like, yeah, I mean, that's one of the craziest stories we've ever heard, because it just doesn't normally, like, studios are stupid, but they're not normally that stupid.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they clearly thought through this. They were like, we need a movie star to sell this film that doesn't have that much name recognition. So they thought through that. And then I can't believe that they would have even considered something like putting her in yellowface. It's like Cloud Atlas was just, imagined.
I love Cloud Atlas, but gosh, yeah. So problematic.
Yeah, but I mean, you mentioned the global, like, the Marvel films thing, the fact that it's not just Marvel, it's a lot of tentpole films. It's in Transformers, they'll toss in, Leaping Bing, they'll toss in an Asian movie star being like, oh, look, there she is. Or like in, I think in Independence Day Resurgence, which, okay, I have to admit, I only went to see because we gave it an F. I was like, I have to see it. They had, like, a couple of scenes with this huge movie star in China. Her name's Angela Baby. My parents know who she is, so that's why she's a big movie star. Yeah, so she was in it for, like, maybe, like 7 minutes tops. And that's just them throwing the Asian box office a bone, thinking like, oh, that's someone they recognize, so it'd be great. And it's so funny because it's like, it's something that still, even though the box office there does bonkers for these films, it's why there are more Transformers films coming. It's like a habit now that also has that still doesn't make those big Chinese Hong Kong movie stars actually be the star of these films. It's like there's a ceiling. There's a bamboo ceiling, as it's called. And so it's just it's something that I think audiences are uncomfortable with. But when the studios see that these films do really well internationally, they're like, we're just going to keep doing it. It's going to be fine. And you can't break it. We can keep giving these films Fs, but they're going to be seen.
Well, from what I understand, they also really, I mean, Chinese audiences really don't like that kind of stuff either, because they know that like we're pandering to them directly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's like really obvious what we're doing. And I think it's also just like a bad approach is that, okay, so you're throwing like you're throwing someone like Angela Baby in this movie for like 2 seconds to appeal to your international box office. But I think the real problem is like visibility here. Like, you don't need to be putting Asian actors in movies for 5 seconds for like a quick cameo to appeal to your Chinese box office. You need to be putting Asian actors in movies in the U.S. for Asian people in the U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's just such pandering, and it's so obvious, I think, is the thing. I mean, it's just like the lowest denominator. It's like the easiest way they could have done this. Just like, oh, let's pluck them over, put them in, and then, it's going to work so well. But like, no, it hasn't. You're right. Like the response to The Great Wall has been so awful so far. I mean, the director's great. Zhang Yimou, everyone has loved his work, and so this is something that's really tripped people up. Like, oh, why is he doing this? What's going on? Why is Matt Damon the lead in your movie? And they say like, oh, it's a monster movie, it's fantasy, and like that's the thing. You get caught in this place where you're like, oh, I love the people working on this, but oh, I hate this part of it, and then that's where you get stuck as an audience member. I mean, the point is, they've chosen the lowest denominator. They've chosen the easiest way to go about pandering. And it's worked against them, but also for them enough that they will continue doing it.
The Great Wall is the most shocking example to me because it's from Zhang Yimou. So why does he have Matt Damon at the front of this film? And of course, the excuse, like you said, is that it's folklore, that it's based on a folktale, so therefore it's okay. Like if there are dragons, therefore there shouldn't be Asian people in a story about the Great Wall. Like that makes sense. And the other thing about that movie is I feel like that they did throw in, there is a pop star in that movie. I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
I think he's either a Korean pop star or a Chinese pop star, but he's crazy famous. And I feel like that was another person that was just sort of thrown in there for the box office internationally. And when I remember when I was at the press conference for The Great Wall at New York Comic Con, and people were asking Matt Damon about the controversy, and this young pop star was there, and no one was really addressing him, but he was sort of like, well, he's in the movie too. Like there are some Asian people, and sort of just kind of tossing it back to these supporting characters. And of course, we don't know how many lines they have and how prominent they are in the movie. But still, at the end of the day, it's Matt Damon saving the day as another white savior.
Right. You have the bare bones of the story. And I think you can't just toss it to another actor saying, like, oh, there's an Asian face. I mean, that that would be like us talking about Doctor Strange and just being like, oh, well, Benedict Wong is there. No, what we were saying before is he is an actual character, and that's a good thing. If the pop star, his name is also not coming to me at this moment. Now, if he is an actual character, well then great. But the marketing so far for the film just seems like here's the white hero, he is saving China from dragons and monsters. And oh, okay, well, great. So what is this pop star doing? You have no idea. You glimpse him in the trailer along with other Asian faces. And this is where I have to praise Star Wars. Rogue One has clearly shown, not that I've seen Rogue One, if I have, there would be snipers pointed at me, but from the trailers, from what we've seen, Donnie Yen is his own character. You've seen Wen Jiang be his own character. Like they have character. They're not just background players. And that's what matters. Then again, haven't seen these films. Totally depends on how they play. But that's the difference.
In comparison, I think that there's like a comparison to be made. Like something like The Great Wall, you have Matt Damon, who feels like he's in it, not just as like token big movie star guy to make sure people go see it, but in a way that feels like training wheels almost. It's like we can't trust this movie full of Asian people to succeed on its own in America. We have to put Matt Damon in it to make sure it does. But then when you look at something like Star Wars, like that's going to get by regardless because of like name recognition. But I do have faith in Rogue One and sight unseen. Like still, like I just based on the strength of The Force Awakens, like you can say what you want about like if you didn't like the movie or you had problems with it or you felt like it was, too much like, just a reboot of A New Hope. Like I think that there's something really special going on at Lucasfilm right now. And even though I'm still angry with Kathleen Kennedy because she still has not hired a woman to direct any of these movies yet, like there's a lot of diversity going on in the Star Wars universe right now. Like The Force Awakens alone, you don't just have a diverse cast of different races and genders. You have in the background, even just the background actors, half of them are women and people of color. Mm-hmm. People who don't even have lines. Just half of them are women and people of color. And that's like a big thing too. Mm-hmm. You have to have a diverse background cast. Like even if you just have like a crowd of people in the background, you can't just have a bunch of white dudes.
Yeah. That should just be on a t-shirt.
That's been a big issue. And that was something I was surprised to learn last year when I was doing some research on another article, was just how many people in these background scenes, like background extras with no speaking lines, are white men. It's a huge number. And so something like that stood out to me where it was like, oh, like not only are they diversifying like their main cast, but people who don't even have lines are diverse. So they're doing something right.
Yeah, I think if anything, Star Wars and Lucasfilm are sort of like trying to lead the way slowly, but surely. Like I think Kelly Marie Tran is in episode 8. So that's something to look forward to. And it's exciting to see that Lucasfilm is doing that. Yeah. It also made me think of, there was a quote by Greg Silverman of Warner Brothers in one of your pieces, Shirley, where he said diversity is good business about Suicide Squad, which I like just reading that quote, I was like, what? Someone at a studio said this?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was talking to him, he was like, and diversity is good business. That was proven by Suicide Squad. And then he stopped talking, and I was like, what do you mean by that? Because, I think in our bubble of entertainment journalists and critics, Suicide Squad was pretty much universally panned. So it was like, oh, this is going to be your example? But he made the point that if you show Latino superheroes or Asian superheroes, that's moving the needle in the right direction. And he cited Jay Hernandez. He cited the actress who played Katana. He just said that as long as you have more faces, then it'll appeal to more audiences. He said that they made sure that Suicide Squad had scenes for them, and that way audiences who saw themselves on screen would want to come. And that was something that at first I questioned him on, because I was like, how do you know? Like, why Suicide Squad of all the films? And he said that when they went with test audiences, they were more eager to see it because they saw themselves on screen. And that actually is just that is something that everyone should think, and yet is something that's so hard to carry out. Because if you look at, other Warner Brothers films, it's not like Batman versus Superman featured prominent Asian actors aside from the woman who followed Jesse Eisenberg around. And so they're it's not something that's worked for them all the time. But he cited Suicide Squad as a in the end I thought, that's a pretty good example. It was a diverse group of villains, not necessarily heroes.
Right. I guess that's the start, at least.
That is a start. That's just the thing. It's like when we think about diversity and inclusion, it's almost as if Hollywood takes a step forward and then takes 2 steps back when they're like, oh, we did it. And then they forget to do things again. And so this goes back to the point of just sustaining it from the ground up. Really, it's not just people hiring behind the scenes, but it's also fans continuing to point out when things are done incorrectly, and people continuing to applaud the films that do it right. So right now we're saying Lucasfilm doing a great job, and that's something else. This is me kind of pivoting to something else. But sci-fi films have always opened the door for more diverse casts. Sometimes because they end up hiding them under makeup and effects, but that's a good genre to move into, and so it's really good to see them doing that. So it's important to not only yell at the studios doing a bad job, but then also applauding the films that do it correctly. And so even though Suicide Squad was not exactly a great movie by any means, it is important to point out that it did include a diverse core cast, and that's something that's important.
I'm honestly surprised that Warner Brothers hasn't. I mean, in some ways, they are kind of ahead of Marvel. I mean, they're going to have a solo female superhero movie before Marvel. They did they did have Katana in Suicide Squad, hero or villain. Still, that's like before Benedict Wong ever showed up in Doctor Strange. So, I mean, like, honestly, I would not be surprised at this point if Warner Brothers was like the first studio to we're going to put an Asian director on a big superhero movie, or we're going to put an Asian superhero in a movie, in his own movie or her own movie. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be shocked at this point, whether it's good or bad. I mean, I guess that's kind of the downer is their movies aren't or have not been very good, but at least they're trying.
Yeah, true. And it's interesting when you look at the DC TV space too, as far as the Arrowverse goes, right? It's Arrowverse plus Supergirl, however the time universe thing works. I mean, it's funny you have Supergirl featuring what was it recently? I'm going to screw this up, but I think the Kyler Lee, whoever plays the sister to Supergirl, that just came out as lesbian, and then right. they were also the universe that had out characters on Legends of Tomorrow. That's before Marvel even went into anything as far as TV goes. And I feel like we're just panning Marvel at this point. But no, it's important to look at the superhero genres. There are such huge bubbles in the entertainment world that it's time. And so there you go.
Right. I mean, they occupy so much space on screens, and they lead so much in just the industry in general that we can't not really pick on them, whether they're doing well or not. So, I mean, if they get better, then we'll pick on them less.
There you go. I mean, it's also interesting that the superhero genre in general has been a little bit slow as far as Asian representation goes, because when I was talking to John M. Chu, the director of Crazy Rich Asians, he was saying, we are at a crossroads. This is moving in the right direction now that this has been greenlit along with the Disney's Mulan adaptation. But keep in mind that these are both Asian stories. These are very Asian-centric stories. And he made a point, along with other actors I spoke to, that it's important that eventually there are actors seen in other genres. That it's not just, here's an Asian story, therefore Asian cast, so it has to be an Asian cast. It should be, here's a totally original story, maybe not a superhero story. Here's a totally original story, not with an Asian background, but let's cast an Asian actor in it. So actually, Edge of 17 is a good example. The actor in that, he's Asian Canadian, and he plays a teenager despite being 31, I believe.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. I feel better about having giant crush on him now.
There you go. But yeah, that's not a character that I think audiences would have imagined on paper being Asian, but could be. So that's what's important.
I think it's just opening your mind and just casting anyone. I mean, doing colorblind or gender blind casting, I think is really important. I can see how, Erwin especially his name, Erwin, on the page, you probably would not imagine an Asian kid or you probably just default to white. But on screen, he totally steals that movie because he's given that opportunity to do so. Mm-hmm. And that kid is he's my favorite person on the planet right now. I want to marry him, and I also want to see him in everything from now on. Put him in everything immediately.
There you go. That really is the bottom line. Giving someone an opportunity to get out there and make a character his own. Colorblind casting, it's been around for a long time. It's just it just takes a while. There's there have been steps forward, steps back, as I've said, but opportunity, that's what people get angry about, and that's what needs to continue to happen. I think, I was talking to, so I'm going to bring this back to Masi. When I was talking to Masi, it wasn't just because he's a prominent Asian television actor, but also because he's a producer on Netflix's Death Note, which has cast white actors as their leads. Mm-hmm. And, Masi isn't the casting director by any means. He's not the director. But he was explaining that they went in the end with the best actors for the parts. And, when you hear that, it's okay, well, I guess they opened the door. They did give people opportunities, but it just didn't work out. Womp womp. And I kind of wanted to argue with him, but he was already very hesitant about how much he could say. And he was saying that, it's a case-by-case thing. And I guess my point is it's so hard sometimes to translate those opportunities to success stories like Hayden's in Edge of 17, because there are so many missed ones. And even when there are Asian producers, even when there are Asian writers. And that's kind of what's sad. They, you can't change their minds. They were the ones in the room. But I guess the bottom line is, as long as there continue to be opportunities open to Asian actors, as long as there are Asian writers and Asian producers, even if it goes the other way, as long as they are there, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a step. But I think it's that things like social media and petitions are giving people and audiences a chance to actually push back, and to actually push back on that common phrase of, we gave it to the best actor. Okay, sure, but how many of the best actors did you look at before deciding who the number one best actor was? Which, you hear that in so many other types of casting that are with other minorities, where they go for a cisgender actor over a trans actor, or a white actor over an actor of color. And yeah, I just think the opportunity is really in pushing back constantly now in any ways that we can. If it's getting around a hashtag, if it's getting around maybe boycotting a movie. Not that I'm saying that to do that specifically, but maybe. I think in one of your pieces, Shirley, Ming-Na said that you just don't go to the theater if you don't want to support it. And that's, people went to the theater and supported Suicide Squad despite it being a trash movie, but that showed that they liked it, so therefore diversity is good. So if you don't support something that, isn't staying true to the storytelling that it should and representing diversity on all fronts that it can, then maybe that will be taken into account as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that I have to think about as a moviegoer, really, because sometimes God, I just remember when Ghost in the Shell was announced, I was like, oh my God, they're making a Ghost in the Shell movie. And, watching these trailers, it looks really cool. There are moments from the original anime in it where she's coming out under her thermo-optic, camouflage and kicking people around, and you're like, oh my God, that's exactly from the movie. But you have to force yourself to say, what do I believe in most? And what I believe in is this, is in representation. And I believe that this was not the right decision. And you have to force yourself not to give over money, even though that sounds kind of easy. I don't want my wallet to, hemorrhage all my cash. But but it can be hard because it piques your curiosity, and sometimes it's a project you really love. And on the other hand, for Hollywood, they what I wanted to say back to Masi and to casting directors who told me their stories was well, you should have tried harder. But it's that's not my place to say that. But that's something that I'm happy that the Crazy Rich Asians film is doing. That they're working hard. That they, from the get-go, they knew in their meetings that this was going to take much more effort than a typical Hollywood movie, where you have loads of options. This, they were we're going to cast an all-Asian cast, which means we're going to really have to put our feelers out. They put out a casting call recently, and as long as they're working hard, well, then fans can also work hard to stop themselves from seeing films that do things incorrectly.
Totally.
Yeah, I know that I've had to boycott some movies just because I just can't deal. Just jokingly, and most recently, I don't see Johnny Depp movies anymore, and Fantastic Beasts sort of tricked me. So not about it. But I think
only
it is if you really are convicted about something, how much I hate Johnny Depp as a human being and actor, I can be I'm just not going to see these movies anymore. Just I'm not going to go see movies by certain directors that I know are going to be insulting to my gender. I'm not going to go see movies by people who are going to be incredibly racist or insensitive. If you're just not going to make a movie for me, then it's not a movie for me. So I'm not going to go see it.
Hollywood is very easily forgiving. Woody Allen can make Crisis in 6 Scenes. Mel Gibson can be an awards contender for Hacksaw Ridge. But it really does come down to the fans. And so that's the call being put out there. And it is hard. Like I said, I'm like, I have to tell myself, no, don't go see Ghost in the Shell. At least don't pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't just like have someone take you and they'll pay for it, or you know, you'll get a screener eventually, probably.
Right. There you go. Just join this industry and get screeners.
Yeah. The one thing I've been thinking about a lot, reading lots of pieces on diversity and writing about them, is just how important it is in general this year and the next 4 years, how much we really do need diversity in film. And, beyond just being able to go to the movies and see people that look like us and tell our stories from any minority perspective, I think we need that now more than ever, now that we're entering this Trump era of presidency and this scary time. I feel like we don't often think about art, but at the very least, that is a place where we can see ourselves reflected and know that we have a voice there. And there was just a piece written recently by Angie Han at Slash Film about this, and just sort of advocating for how filmmakers now more than ever really should be pushing. And I just really hope that we see that.
Yeah, I agree. I think films and television, especially these days, have such an impact, and I mean, Obama gets a lot of credit for sort of changing the tide. You know, there's no way to measure how much of an effect Obama had on, Shondaland as a whole, for example. But it matters that creators think about how much politics is influencing their work, and how important it is to continue being inclusive, because that's what people see.
Right, that's how we're going to be spending the next 4 years, is escaping to the movie theater. So let's at least see, not all white men.
There you go. It's a good plan.
Well, thank you for joining us, Shirley.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, it was. And where can we find you on social media?
Oh, you guys can find me on Twitter at ShirklesXP. That is ShirklesXP. There's a story behind it, but you know what? You'll have to be my friend to figure that out.
Okay. For another episode.
Yes.
And you could find me on Twitter at CinemaBite, BITE. And where can we find you, Britt?
You can find me on Twitter as well at Miss Britt Hayes, Hayes.
Thanks for listening. For more of the latest movie and TV news, head to ScreenCrush.com. Follow us on Twitter at ScreenCrushNews, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram and Snapchat at the username ScreenCrush.